Sheila Neshinov. She wrote some years a book on regulation. I forgot the name. Perhaps you know, Doreen. What is the book title?
Is it Designs on Nature?
Yes, Design on Nature. Yes. Thank you, Emma. Oh, you have it there. Okay, great. It's that book describes the development and the rising of biotechnology in the United States, Germany, and the UK, and try to describe the differences in these different countries. And she's also describing how regulators are involved in that. And then she introduced the concept of regulatory sciences. And, well, regulation is not a simple process because you have to deal with science, scientific information. But you also develop new kind of knowledge that is regulative knowledge. So in that kind of sense, you are also very innovative as a regulator. And Jessenov says its purpose clearly is to produce techniques and processes and artifacts that further the task of policy development. And artifacts can also be a rule. You know, yesterday Henny talked already about regulation products. What's kind of an artifact? That is something that is made by regulators. Oh, I'm wrong because it was written in the 5th branch. This was another book. I took this from the 5th branch, related book. It's from the same author. And the FDA, that is the regulatory important agency in the United States, as you know. Regulatory science is the science of developing new tools, standards, and approaches to assess the safety, efficiency, quality, and performances of all FDA-regulated products. So, yeah, regulatory science really exists. But there's a big difference between regulatory science and normal science or academic science, and we should realize that. Because the political influence is of course different. It is often directly influenced by politics, by what the ministry wants or what the law says, whereas this is only indirectly influenced in normal academic science. Accountability, well, you have a very big accountability to your legislature, to the ministry, the courts, and the public. And in science, it's the main accountability is towards your scientific peers. Increasingly also to the public, but this is the main thing for many scientists. Incentives, well, you want to be in compliance with the legal requirements because you are working in a legal framework for academic science. Is much more the professional recognition that you get from publishing in scientific papers. The role of uncertainty is quite different. You don't like really uncertainty in regulation because you want to produce insights how to deal with it. Whereas I think uncertainty is a kind of a basic material for science because you start with what you don't know and you want to know, and that is what you want. For scientists, is the end product is not so important anyway. It's important the questions, the things you don't know. Quite different from regulatory science. The products, grey literature, baseline data, monitoring data, and sometimes published scientific papers. It's just on the last one, but that's the first one for scientists. And the time frame is determined by all regulation, by the regulation framework itself, whereas often it is open-ended for academic science. And of course you have also science that is done by professionals in companies, and then some of the elements of regulatory science also are valid for them. But you see there are a lot of difference between these types of sciences.
What do you mean with grey literature?
With grey literature? Grey literature is literature in reports that are not seen as scientific papers. Pre-reports or internal reports and so on and so on. Policy papers sometimes. And they are difficult to access because you don't find them in libraries. That's why they call them grey.
Not peer reviewed.
often not peer-reviewed. Yes, true. Yeah. So regulatory science is indeed also located in a very complex context: politics, culture, public, law, the sciences, of course, but also the international context we are working in. This is what I would like to say about science, technology, and innovation, but I would like to illustrate that with some examples, and especially I would like to go into the green revolution and what I call the hybrid revolution that took place in the last century. And what you see here, you see here different so-called agricultural technological revolutions. In the 19th century we had the so-called mechanical revolution. I think this is not really true for Africa, but it is for Europe and the United States. It's really, and it was a big issue, you know, the new machines that came up, the tractors that came up, that really changed the way of doing agriculture. And then in the early 20th century we had the chemical revolution that produced pesticides and fertilizers that really changed agriculture in a very, very strong way in about 100 years ago. When my father was farmer, and he told me about that, you know, it was quite different from when I started to work on his farm. And in the mid-20th century we had the hybrid revolution. I'll go into that later on. The green revolution takes care of all these different revolutions and technological developments, and integrated them. And here you see also the trajectory, you know, and technological change is based on former changes, so it builds up. And I think the biotech revolution also builds up these older developments. In the hybrid technology, this morning you already referred to it. It was a really important technology. And, well, most of you do have knowledge about biology, I suspect. So, the concept of inbreeding is clear for everybody. Yeah. And so it's crossing to lines again and again, you know, within the same varieties. And often when you do that, the productivity of such lines is decreasing and decreasing, and you get very weak varieties on the end. But then they discovered already in the end of the 19th century that if you are crossing these two lines with each other, then surprisingly new plant that is produced then show a much better performance. And this is called the heterosis effect. But then this plant is a very heterozygote, but all plants are similar. But then you go on in the next generation, there are by genetic processes, the performance really falls down. And this was a very interesting discovery because it made many things possible. And well, it was discovered in the late 19th century, and it was applied in the first half of the 20th century, especially in maize breeding. And here you see what is going on. You have pollination of two maize plants and crossing two incompatible inbreds, and then the result is a hybrid variety. And here you see, for instance, an example of some real big difference as you see here. There are many of these kind of examples. What is so interesting in that is, I come to that later. Here you see a Google picture from just putting in hybrid varieties of rice. You see, you get a lot of pictures of all the different varieties of rice, and you can do the same for maize or any big crop. But not only the cereals, also nuts, vegetables, flowers are nowadays hybrid varieties. So if you go, in my country, if I go to the shop to buy some seeds for my garden, certainly there are hybrids. Same is true for tomatoes or whatever. And what is important to realize, especially when you have this situation here, is that this appearance only lasts one generation, and that made it possible that seed companies could evolve. Because if you have such inbred lines in your hands, you can produce seeds, but others cannot. Because you cannot go on with the result. So farmers have to buy every year the new hybrid seeds and get, in that sense, dependent on the seed company to get the seeds every year. So, and that was really changing the culture of mixed farming in the early 20th century in many countries, especially in the United States and in Europe. That worked because the performance was much better, but they kept dependent on seed companies. And it was also applied, well, here what you see, it was also applied in what we call the Green Revolution that started so after Second World War II. It's not only to deal with breeding and crossing and producing hybrid seeds, it has also to do with irrigation, because such high productive plants also need often much more water. They also need machines to harvest. They also need fertilizers. They also need pesticides. So here you see that many different technologies come together, and together they were able to generate what we call the gene revolution that started after Second World War in many parts of the world. And that really led to the following sequence is not good. This one first. So but it also changed culture of agriculture. This is the old system, Here you see painting from Vincent van Gogh. That's well-known Dutch painter from late 19th century. But I use the farmer produces his own seed. And that's changed because of the development of hybrid seeds in a chain. We have the scientists, the technologists, we have the seed company, we have seed firms selling seeds, and then we have the farmers. And you cannot go on with your own seeds, so you get a quite different new systems. So that developed in many parts of the world. And I'll go back. And it also, no, I go back. And that changed, this is also the same thing, here you see a kind of value change. We have a lot of inputs, seeds, pesticides, fertilizer, machines, energy, farm, product, external market, consumers. Some have for their own use, and that is a modern farming system, replacing what is called subsistence farming. And here this is based on a sort of cyclic, how do you say that? Cyclic system with only sunlight and rainwater as external inputs. Well, I don't want to romanticize this system, because there's a lot of poverty also in this system, but it is really a big change, what is going on. The hybrid technology, so they have high yields, but seeds cannot be reproduced by farmers without production loss. It implies a lot of external inputs, and it also leads to what they call an industrialized seed system. And so you get, this is the old system. You can see subsistence farming, and this is the modern farming. And now I go back, so this was the one thing. Some people say, well, it's really great what we did, because we had a very big production, high production, and we solved a lot of problems. But the other way, the use of pesticides, irrigation may lead to environmental degradation. And what you also see is that there is also questions on social aspects of it. I'll come to it later. But that's for later. This is a very interesting picture. Do you recognize this guy? Does anybody know who this is? This.
That Lemon Bolland? Lemon Bolland?
Sorry?
Would that be Bolland?
I said, my ears are not so good, so.
Would that be Lemon Bolland? No.
No. This is former President of the United States, Mr. Johnson.
Oh,
This is a picture that was taken in the 60s, and he's visiting the Philippines in a rice field, because that was one of the countries where the Green Revolution took place in the first place, and he's visiting that because he was so proud on the success of the Green Revolution there. But it also shows why is the President of the United States visiting a field, a rice field? Because it has to do with a lot of politics. Political context of the Green Revolution is really present. If you look, around the 1960s, you had the danger of a lot of famines. There was much social unrest because of poverty in many developing countries. And there was the growing power of communism in many countries in that day, in those days. And there was a theory, and especially in the United States and a lot of Western economists had that so-called modernization theory in mind. The main drivers of economic development is technology and governmental planning. So let's do that, was the issue. And they started the Green Revolution. So there were a lot of public funding organizations, the Ford Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation, that put a lot of money in the development of these hardware technology and the irrigation system, and to combine them and to introduce them in many developing countries in order to prevent poverty and unrest, and so to prevent the rise of communism in many of the Asian states and also in Africa. They were very afraid for that. So it was a big role for governments, it was a big role for charities, and international research organizations were established anywhere in the world. And there was a free use of knowledge. All the seeds were made free available for them. And this is the political context of the Green Revolution. So it's much more than only technology development. There is also political development what was going on. And here you see the big success again of the Green Revolution. This is the production of of maize. This was published 3 years ago in Nature. You see the production from 1961 until 1997. It's really amazing, the production rise. And here you see the price is going down. So and the same is true for rice. And what you see is that farmers are much more able to produce rice and maize and other cereals. And for people living in cities, they had better access to food because of lower prices. So both are very positive, so to say. But not positive for all farmers, because farmers that could not apply these technologies, for instance, they were poor, they did not have the money to buy the new seeds or to buy equipment that was needed. They were marginalized, and then the lower prices really pushed them away from farming. So you see here also a kind of a social mechanism that is going on. Big question mark in, because the success was especially very big in Asian countries. It was not so good success in African countries. And so it was a great success, but there were a lot of environmental costs. Marginalization of the poorest farmers, replacement of knowledge and culture, because new varieties did replace the old varieties. And also old knowledge disappeared because all the new ways of doing farming. It was an instrument of politics, and it failed in South in sub-Saharan Africa. And why was that? Well, it had to do with different conditions. It had to do with there were no roads in Africa. If you produce more, then you have to carry that, to transport that to the market. But there were no roads, there was not good equipment. Many farmers were very remote from places they couldn't be reached. So anyway, the conditions, the physical conditions and the socio-economic conditions were not really good for the African situation. So really, that's why it failed in the African continent. So here you see that technology development is very complicated, it's very complex, but is interweaving with a lot of societal and social aspects. So what Doreen yesterday said from the seamless web of science and technology society is really illustrated by this example of the Green Revolution and the underlying technologies. So we may ask, what does it mean for the gene revolution, the biotechnology revolution that is going on nowadays? Well, here you see the gene revolution is working nowadays. It started, well, you know, the commercial introduction started in 1996, and from that point we have a steady increase of the area of biotechnology crops, and I think this picture was already shown before this. Yeah. This is already known, of course. We have 4 crops, commodities that are, well, I think 99% of all genetically modified crops are these 4 crops, and nearly all soybean is genetically modified. Same is true of cotton. Well, a third of all maize fields are consisting of genetically modified crops, and canola is more or less the same. And if we compare these 2 revolutions, then we see similarities and we see differences. We see in both a central role of top-down technology. That is true. You know, the technology for the Green Revolution was also developed by research institutes and were placed to farmers. We also see a focus on plant characteristics. You know, the plant itself is a central issue. You want to have high-producing, better-producing plants. And what we also see in the global market came to existence replacing subsistence farming. And that is, I think, also the case with modern biotechnology, that it is, until now, when you look to the 4 big crops, it is especially this that is going on. But there are large differences. Of course, the scientific and technological backgrounds are quite different from in these 2 cases. We have different types of applications because, as I showed you earlier, many crops and plants and vegetables are nowadays hybrid varieties, but we have only 4 crops nowadays in biotechnology that have been changed. The political context is quite different nowadays. Communism has fallen, and now we have a social-liberal political condition that made it possible that not charities play a big role, but international companies as Monsanto. So we see a lot of impact of private capital. That's quite different from the situation with the Green Revolution. The roles of NGO and public acceptance is quite different. Earlier we had a discussion, why is it that GMOs are always so critically considered by so many people? And what you can see is that the Green Revolution was more or less easily accepted in that time, 20 or 30, 40 years ago. And I think it has to do with what I mentioned earlier, with that science and technology has changed into a contextualized version. Society has changed, and that is why such a new technology is nowadays discussed by society. And that is different from the situation we had 30, 40 years ago. really society has changed. And that is the reason why GMOs are so intensively discussed by so many people. What also is different is the ownership of the technology, the genes and the plants. Now we have a lot of private ownerships, intellectual property rights. That was not a discussion in the Green Revolution. And what also has changed is that the amount of regulation. Nowadays we see a lot of development in regulation, and the Green Revolution was hardly regulated anyway. So the Green Revolution and the Gene Revolution. So my question is how to do it better. And what I would like to say, I would like to show this picture again. You know, science and technology is really involved in a very broad and wide context of institutional and social aspects. And I hope that I have shown that with my example of the Green Revolution and a little bit of the biotechnology revolution that is going on, that this is illustrated by, that perspective is illustrated. Thank you very much.
Any questions, some thoughts, comments on the presenter?
Thank you. I just want to understand the difference between Green Revolution and Gen Revolution.
Sorry?
Understand the difference. Is it the same, Gen Revolution and Green Revolution?
It's not the same. What I will try to say is that the Green Revolution is actually based on classical breeding technology, and you know, here what I try to say that the Green Revolution, there are some similarities, but what you also see is that there are a lot of differences in the context of this the gene revolution, or the biotechnology revolution. And also the technology is quite different. The Green Revolution was based on hybrid breeding, what is more or less a conventional classical way of breeding, whereas gene revolution, biotechnology, is based on crossing quite different species, what is not possible in the classic way of breeding. So there's a big difference between these two developments.
Imo?
I've got two questions or observations. First one pertains to the definition of technology. And here I'm particularly referring to your slides where you talked about 50% of technologies being used in the developed world, and I don't know the percentages, adoption, and then
There was a pie chart.
yeah.
This one?
No, the round one.
A few slides back.
Jeffrey
Jeffrey
Sachs.
Sachs.
Access to technologies. 50, 35.
Oh, that for Jeffrey,
Yeah.
Jeffrey Sachs.
Yes. The question I have is actually triggered by the fact that at a workshop I attended a few years ago, which was dealing with UNESCO indicators on technology and innovations in Africa, and then we had some experts from the developed world, of course. And I remember Nigeria claimed a certain innovation index, and the developed countries were not agreeing that their innovation index was so high. And I remember them saying, but you have to know the rough conditions in Nigeria under which people survive to appreciate the amount and extent of indigenous innovations that people use to survive on a day-to-day basis. So that takes me to the definition of technologies.
Good.
And why you only consider these high-tech sort of technologies or whether you only consider those ones, because that is very important for countries like ours, where people really use informal innovation is linked to the slide on levels of innovation. I am thinking here that technologies like biotechnology is really redefining the way we regulate and legislate traditionally. It's challenging the existing systems. Therefore, the systems often are failing to address the unique challenges. So could it be right to say we probably also need some kind of regulatory innovation in order to be able to deal with the peculiar challenges within our existing systems? Because currently, really, the challenges cannot be handled by the existing system structures and human institutions.
Okay, your two questions are related, I understand. Yeah. Thank you very much, Emma, for this question. Yes, you're right. I focus especially on the big technologies, so to say. And I didn't know if I had really time enough to go into the what we may call tailored biotechnology. I don't know if you know Guido Ruivenkamp. No. Guido Ruivenkamp, the Dorino him. Yes, I think there is also what we can say local technology, technology that is applied by farmers themselves. I think farmers are innovative themselves.